Victor Hayes slammed his car door so hard the window rattled, then looked up and realized he was standing in front of the wrong school. His 3-year-old daughter was already crying in his arms. His phone was exploding with calls, and he had 38 minutes before the most important investor meeting of his career collapsed without him. He'd built a $100 million company from nothing. He'd survived board coups, market crashes, and a divorce that nearly broke him in two. But standing on that sidewalk holding a sobbing little girl with paint on her shoes and nowhere to go, Victor Hayes had never felt more lost in his life. And then, a stranger's voice changed everything. Drop a comment with your city. I want to see how far this story travels, and if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. This one's going to stay with you. The morning started the way most of Victor Hayes' mornings started, badly and getting worse by the minute. His alarm had gone off at 5:15 a.m., same as always. By 5:16, his phone was already lighting up the nightstand like a slot machine paying out a jackpot nobody wanted. He grabbed it without opening his eyes, muscle memory doing the work. 7 missed calls, 4 from Marcus Hale, his COO in Frankfurt, 2 from the company's head of legal, 1 from a number he didn't recognize, which at 5 a.m. was never good news. He sat up in the dark, rubbed his face, and said out loud to nobody, "All right, here we go." His daughter Leah was still asleep down the hall. She slept like a stone, that kid, arms out, mouth open, completely surrendered to the universe in the way only a 3-year-old could be. Victor had stood in the doorway, watching her the night before, just for a minute, struck by a feeling he couldn't name. Something between fierce love and quiet guilt. The combination had become so familiar lately that he'd stopped trying to separate the two. Today was her first day of preschool. He'd written it on the kitchen whiteboard 3 weeks ago in red marker, "Leah, first day." Oakwood, 8:30 a.m. He'd circled it twice. He'd set 2 phone reminders. He'd told Marcus, "Clear my morning on the 14th, no exceptions." And then the Frankfurt crisis happened. Marcus called back before Victor even had his feet on the floor. He answered on the second ring. "Tell me it's contained," Victor said. "It's not contained." Marcus's voice had that particular flatness that meant things were worse than the emails suggested. "The Mueller contract, Victor, they're pulling out. All of it. 42 million euros gone. Reinhardt went directly to the board last night and said if we can't guarantee the Q4 delivery timeline, he's taking his infrastructure spend to Velox." Victor was already walking to the bathroom. "Velox can't deliver half of what we promised them." "Reinhardt doesn't care. He cares about optics. He's got a shareholder call in 3 weeks and he wants something clean to point at. So give him something clean. Restructure the timeline, bring the Phase 1 deliverable forward, and get me on a call with Reinhardt directly." "He won't take your call." Victor stopped walking. "He won't take my call." His assistant said, and I'm quoting here, that Mr. Reinhardt prefers to let the contract dissolution proceed without further escalation. That's lawyer language, for he's already decided. Victor turned the bathroom light on. His own reflection stared back at him, tie still on from last night's shirt, half untucked eyes that hadn't had a full night's sleep since sometime in October. Get me a direct line to someone on his board, someone who still picks up. I'm already on it. But Victor, the Callaway meeting this morning. If Reinhardt's exit leaks before you walk into that room, it won't leak. Control it. I'm trying to control the North Sea. I'll do what I can. Victor hung up. Stood there in the fluorescent light for a moment. Then he turned on the shower, and while the water was heating up, he started mentally drafting his opening remarks for the Callaway meeting. 8 years of building Hayes Technologies. Every acquisition, every late night, every calculated risk that paid off, and every one that nearly sank them, came down to today. Callaway Capital had been circling them for 18 months. If he walked into that room with the Frankfurt situation bleeding into the room, the whole deal could evaporate. He had to be sharp. He had to be perfect. He was in the shower for approximately 4 minutes before Leah started screaming. Not a hurt scream, not a scared scream, Just the scream of a small person who had woken up, discovered no one was in her immediate vicinity, and decided this was absolutely unacceptable. "Dad, Dad!" "Coming, Bug." He turned off the water, grabbed a towel, and was down the hall in 30 seconds. She was sitting up in her bed with her hair going in 11 different directions, and her favorite stuffed rabbit, an ancient one-eared thing she called Mr. Buttons, clutched to her chest. When she saw him, she immediately extended both arms in the universal 3-year-old command, "Pick me up right now." He scooped her up without hesitation. She burrowed into his neck, still warm from sleep, and he stood there in the hallway in his towel, holding her, breathing her in for just a second. "Big day today," he said. "Mr. Buttons is hungry," she announced. "Mr. Buttons will survive. You want eggs?" She considered this seriously. "Dinosaur eggs." "We don't have the dinosaur egg cutter, babe. We have the regular, I want dinosaur. Leah, dinosaur." He gave her the plain eggs and cut them into rough triangle shapes with a butter knife, which he called pterodactyl eggs, and she accepted this compromise under protest. While she ate, he ironed a shirt with one hand and answered 3 emails with the other. His housekeeper, Mrs. Paulson, usually handled the morning routine, but she was visiting her daughter in Tampa and wouldn't be back until Thursday. It was just the two of them. It was fine. He had a plan. The plan, as it turned out, had a serious structural flaw. He dressed Leah in the outfit he'd picked out the night before, a yellow dress with little white flowers that she'd chosen herself at the store, and she was uncharacteristically cooperative right up until the moment he tried to do her hair. "Hold still, Bug. It hurts." "I barely touched it." "It hurts." "Leah, I need you to hold." She pulled away. The brush caught. She cried. He apologized. She forgave him immediately, and then asked if she could bring Mr. Buttons to school. He said yes before he'd fully thought it through. She ran to get the rabbit. He checked his phone. Marcus again. This time a text Reinhardt's assistant just sent the formal notice. "It's going to be in the European trade press by 11 a.m. our time. You need a counter-narrative ready." Victor typed back, "Draft 1. Run it by legal. I'll review from the car." He looked up. Leah was standing in the doorway in her yellow dress. Mr. Buttons under one arm, backpack on, and she looked so small and so ready and so completely trusting that he was going to take care of everything that something in his chest pulled tight. "Ready, Daddy?" "Ready, Bug." He grabbed his briefcase and his coffee. "Let's go." He will replay the next 20 minutes for the rest of his life. They made it to the car. They made it out of the neighborhood. Leah talked the entire time about a TV show involving animated vegetables that Victor had never watched and could not follow. And he gave appropriate affirmations on autopilot. Really wow. And then what happened, while his mind was simultaneously in Frankfurt in the Callaway conference room, and in 3 email threads he hadn't finished reading. He pulled off the highway at the Greendale exit, turned left on Birchwood, pulled into the parking lot, and saw the sign, Sunshine Learning Center, where every child shines. He parked the car. He got out. Unbuckled Leah. She took his hand. They walked to the front door. And it was only when the receptionist, a young woman with reading glasses pushed up on her head, who was already looking at him with the beginning stages of a patient but firm expression, said, "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" that the first cold wire of something wrong threaded through Victor's chest. "I'm dropping off my daughter," he said. "Hayes. Leah Hayes. First day." The receptionist turned to her computer. Typed. Looked at the screen. Typed again. "I'm not seeing a Leah Hayes registered with us, sir." Victor blinked. "There must be a mistake. She's enrolled. Her first day is today. I have the paperwork at home." "Sir, we have a Leah Chen starting today and a Leah Washington, but no Hayes. What school is she enrolled at?" And Victor's mind went very, very quiet. Oakwood, something said in the back of his brain. Oakwood Academy, on the other side of town. He looked at the sign above the reception desk. Sunshine Learning Center. He looked at his watch. 8:24 a.m. He looked at Leah, who was looking up at him with absolute faith. And then his phone rang. The Callaway pre-meeting call. 35 minutes out. "I made a mistake," he said. His voice came out very calm, which surprised him. "She's enrolled at Oakwood Academy. I came to the wrong school." The receptionist's expression shifted from patient professionalism to something more careful. "Oakwood is about 12 minutes from here. 12 minutes there. Drop off. 12 minutes back across town. Factor in traffic on Jefferson, which was always backed up after 8:15. He was doing the math. He was always doing the math. And the math wasn't working. He crouched down to Leah's level. She was looking at the classroom door behind the reception desk with cautious curiosity. There were voices coming from inside. Kids' voices, laughter, the high, bright sound of a preschool morning. "Hey, Bug, we have a little situation." "What's a situation?" she asked. "It means we have a problem we need to figure out." She nodded seriously. "Like when Mr. Buttons lost his ear." "Exactly like that." He paused. "We came to the wrong school. Your school, the one you're really supposed to go to, is a little far away." Her face changed. He watched it happen in real time, the slow processing, the lip trembling, the gathering storm behind her eyes. "I want to go home," she said. "Leah." "I want to go home, Daddy." He stood back up. His phone was buzzing. The Callaway call starting to come in. He sent it to voicemail, which he'd never done in his professional life. "Is there anything you can do?" he said to the receptionist. He heard his own voice stripped of its usual executive authority, reduced to something raw. "She doesn't know anyone. I know it's irregular, and I know she's not registered. But is there any option here at all?" "I have a situation I absolutely cannot." "Sir, I understand, but we can't just accept unregistered children without—" I know. I'm not asking you to break protocol. I'm asking if there's anything—" "Mr. Hayes." The voice came from behind him. He turned. She was standing in the doorway to the classroom holding a paper towel with blue paint on it. She couldn't have been older than her mid-20s. Dark hair pulled back, a warm expression, and eyes that took in the whole scene in about 2 seconds flat, with the particular calm of someone who dealt with crises of the small and large variety before 9 a.m. on a regular basis. "I'm Clara Matthews," she said. "I'm the lead teacher in room 2. She glanced at the receptionist, then back at Victor, then down at Leah, and she smiled just slightly. Not the performative smile of someone trying to diffuse a situation, but something quieter and more genuine. "I heard what you said. What happened?" "Wrong school," Victor said, and even in 2 words he heard how exhausted he sounded. "She's supposed to be at Oakwood. I can't make it there and back before I have a meeting. A very important meeting. I know how that sounds." "It sounds like a hard morning," Clara said simply. She looked down at Leah. "What's your name?" Leah pressed against Victor's leg and said nothing. "She's shy," Victor said. "At first, she warms up." "What's the rabbit's name?" Leah looked up, surprised that the question was directed at the rabbit. "Mr. Buttons," she said very quietly. Clara nodded with complete seriousness. "That is an excellent name." She looked back at Victor. "Let me talk to our director. Give me 5 minutes." 4 minutes and 50 seconds later, Clara came back with a woman named Dr. Ellen Park, the director, and a temporary enrollment form. The explanation was quick and businesslike. Leah would be treated as a day guest under the same supervision protocols as any registered student, no charge paperwork, signed, contact information on file. "This is an exception," Dr. Park said. "We don't normally—" "I understand completely," Victor said. "I'll have her formally registered by tomorrow, if you'll have her." Dr. Park looked at Clara. Some silent communication passed between them that Victor couldn't fully decode. Then Dr. Park said, "We'll see how the day goes," and walked back down the hall. Victor bent down to Leah. She already had the look, the tight expression, the held-in tears that were about 30 seconds from becoming not held in. "Hey," he said softly. "Look at me." She looked at him. "I know this isn't what we planned. I know you wanted to go to the school with Ava and Sophie, and we're going to fix that, okay? But right now, this is where we are, and I need you to be my brave girl. Just for today." "I don't want to be brave," Leah whispered. "I want to go home." "I know, Bug." He kissed her forehead, held it there for a second. "I love you more than anything in the whole world. You know that?" She nodded, miserable. He stood up, looked at Clara. He expected to see polite professional sympathy. What he actually saw in her face was something he didn't know how to categorize, something that looked almost like understanding. Not of the situation, but of him. The way he was standing, the briefcase in his hand, the tie slightly crooked, the coffee he'd never finished. "She'll be okay," Clara said, and she said it like she meant it, not like a thing you say to send someone out the door faster, but like a statement of fact she was prepared to stand behind. "She cries," he said, "sometimes for a while." "I know," Clara said. "I've been doing this for 4 years. We'll figure it out." He looked at Leah one more time. She had grabbed 2 fistfuls of his jacket and was looking at the floor. He gently uncurled her fingers, kissed the top of her head, handed Mr. Buttons back to her, and then, because he didn't trust himself to say another word, he walked back to his car. He sat in the parking lot of Sunshine Learning Center for 45 seconds, the longest 45 seconds of his morning, before he made himself start the engine. His phone had 17 notifications. The Callaway call was already rescheduled for 9:15. Marcus had texted 3 times. His head of PR had sent a draft counterstatement on the Frankfurt situation that needed his review. He pulled out onto Birchwood Avenue and told himself Leah would be fine. He told himself Clara Matthews knew what she was doing. He told himself that in 8 hours he would pick up his daughter and she would tell him about painting and blocks and whatever songs they sang, and she would be perfectly fine. And this would just be a story they told someday about the crazy morning Daddy took her to the wrong school. He told himself all of this, and he drove toward downtown with both hands on the wheel. And somewhere behind him, in a sunlit classroom on the other side of a door, he was already memorizing the exact color of a young woman with blue paint on a paper towel, was crouching down to his daughter's level and saying something he would not hear until much later. Something small and careful and exactly right. He just didn't know that yet. What city are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. And if this story is hitting you right where you live, hit subscribe. Part 2 is coming, and trust me, you're going to want to be there for it. The Callaway building had 43 floors, and Victor's meeting was on the 41st. He knew this because he'd been to this building 4 times in the last 18 months. Every preliminary meeting, every handshake over coffee that meant nothing, until it meant everything, and every single time he'd walked through those glass doors, feeling like he owned the room before he entered it. That was the trick his first mentor had told him when he was 24 years old and terrified and pretending otherwise. You walk in like you already won. The room adjusts to you, not the other way around. He walked through the doors of Callaway Capital at 9:08 a.m., and the room did not adjust. His reflection hit him in the lobby, glass tie, straightened jacket, pressed briefcase in hand, face composed into the careful neutral of a man who was absolutely not thinking about a 3-year-old girl crying in a classroom he'd never visited before today. He looked exactly like Victor Hayes, CEO, was supposed to look. He felt like someone wearing a Victor Hayes costume. His phone buzzed in his inside pocket. He didn't take it out. He checked in at the front desk, rode the elevator up, and spent 31 floors reminding himself what was at stake. Callaway Capital's investment would give Hayes Technologies the runway to execute the European expansion without the debt structure that had been quietly strangling their balance sheet for 2 years. Without it, they could survive. He'd survived worse, but the path got a lot narrower, a lot less forgiving. He needed this deal. His company needed this deal. 412 employees, most of them with families of their own, needed this deal. He stepped off the elevator on 41 and shook hands with Patrick Callaway's assistant, a sharp-looking young man named Derek, who had always seemed to be silently evaluating everything Victor said and did. "Mr. Calloway is ready for you," Derek said. "He has one other person joining Miriam Cho. She heads their due diligence division." Victor filed that away. Miriam Cho being in the room meant they were serious. It also meant the Frankfurt situation was potentially already on their radar. Miriam Cho's job was to find every crack before the ink dried. "Wonderful," Victor said, and meant none of it. Patrick Calloway was 61 years old, built like a retired linebacker who'd discovered golf and had the particular confidence of a man who had never once in his adult life been made to feel like he was in the wrong room. He stood when Victor entered, shook his hand with a two-handed grip that was either genuinely warm or a very well-practiced simulation of it, and gestured to the chair across the long table. Miriam Cho was already seated, mid-50s, precise, a yellow legal pad in front of her, covered in notes she'd written before Victor arrived. She gave him a small nod. He returned it. "Victor." Patrick settled back into his chair. "Hell of a morning to have traffic." "Traffic was fine," Victor said. "Minor detour." "Well, you're here. That's what matters." Patrick reached for his coffee. "Let's talk about where we are." For the first 40 minutes it went well. Victor had done this enough times that the pitch was almost physical, a rhythm he could feel, knowing when to push forward and when to let silence do the work, when to quote a number and when to tell a story instead. He talked about the Q3 performance, the new enterprise contracts, the infrastructure platform they were building that had no direct competitor in the North American market. Patrick asked smart questions. Victor answered smarter ones. Then Miriam Cho looked up from her legal pad. "I want to ask about the European division," she said. Her voice was precise and unhurried, the voice of someone who had no reason to rush, because she already knew where the conversation was going. "Specifically the Mueller contract." Victor didn't let anything shift in his face. "What would you like to know?" "Word out of Frankfurt this morning is that Reinhardt is pulling the contract. 42 million euros. That's a significant exposure if it hits before Q4 close." "It's a contract revision under active negotiation," Victor said. "Is it?" Miriam's pen tapped once against the legal pad. "Because our contact at Velox suggested they received a formal inquiry from Reinhardt's office yesterday afternoon." Patrick was watching Victor with the patient, steady attention of a man who had seen a lot of pitches in a lot of conference rooms and could feel exactly when one of them was about to change shape. Victor set his water glass down, took one breath, and then he did something he had not fully planned to do. He told the truth. "Here's what's actually happening," he said. "Reinhardt made a political decision. His board has a shareholder presentation in 3 weeks. He wanted a headline, not a contract, and pulling from Hayes and going to Velox gives him the optics of a decisive move, regardless of whether Velox can actually deliver what he needs, which they can't. Velox is 8 months behind on their core infrastructure platform, and everyone in the European market knows it. Reinhardt will figure that out by February, and when he does, will be the only viable alternative." He paused. "This is a short-term disruption in one regional contract. Our North American pipeline is the strongest it's been in 4 years. That's what this investment is actually about." The room was quiet for a moment. Miriam wrote something on her legal pad. Patrick looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "I appreciate a man who doesn't try to tell me the rain is sunshine." "The rain is real," Victor said, "but the forecast is good." Patrick smiled, not the social smile from the handshake, something smaller and more genuine. "I like that." He looked at Miriam. She gave a fractional nod. He looked back at Victor. "Let's talk numbers." They talked numbers for another hour and 20 minutes. Victor's phone on silent in his jacket pocket buzzed 11 times during the meeting. He didn't check it once. When he finally walked out of Callaway Capital at 11:43 a.m., with a term sheet in principle and a formal signing meeting scheduled for Thursday, He sat in his car in the parking structure for a full minute before he did anything else. He pressed the back of his head against the headrest and stared at the concrete ceiling and exhaled for what felt like the first time since 5:16 that morning. He'd done it. 42 million in European exposure, a sleepless night, a crisis managed from a bathroom with a towel around his waist, and he'd walked in and done it anyway. He pulled out his phone. 17 missed texts, 9 emails, 4 voicemails. Marcus had already heard through back channels that the meeting had gone well. Apparently Derek at Callaway had mentioned it to someone, who mentioned it to someone, and the financial world was a very small town when you knew the right people. He scrolled through them quickly, answering the most urgent ones, and then stopped. One text from a number he didn't recognize. It had come in at 10:47 a.m. "Hi, Mr. Hayes. This is Clara Matthews from Sunshine Learning Center. Just wanted to let you know that Leah is doing great. She painted a butterfly and told me it was for you. Hope your morning got better. CM." He read it twice. He read it a third time. Then he sat there for a moment with his thumb hovering over the screen, not entirely sure what he was feeling. It wasn't gratitude exactly, or it wasn't only gratitude. It was something more complicated, something that had to do with the fact that in the middle of the worst professional morning he'd had in recent memory, a person he'd met 40 minutes ago had taken time out of her day to tell him his daughter painted him a butterfly. He typed back, "Thank you. Really. I'll be there to pick her up at 3. He set the phone on the passenger seat, started the car. But before he pulled out of the parking structure, he picked the phone back up and read her message one more time. "She painted a butterfly and told me it was for you." He had no idea why that particular sentence hit him the way it did. He told himself it was just the adrenaline drop after the meeting, the body recalibrating after hours of high-pressure performance. That was the rational explanation. He pulled out of the parking structure and into the midday sun, and he told himself that all the way back to the office. Marcus was waiting for him when he walked into Hayes Technologies headquarters, not at his desk, actually standing in the lobby, coffee in hand with the particular look of a man who needed a full debrief immediately and was trying to pretend he wasn't vibrating with impatience about it. "Callaway," Marcus said. "Thursday. Formal signing." Marcus closed his eyes for approximately 1 second. Then, "I need you in the war room. Reinhardt's people sent a second communication this morning. There's a clause in the original contract about penalty provisions, and legal is losing their mind. They were already walking. Victor matched his pace back in the current of it, the day pulling him forward the way it always did. Meetings, decisions, calls, reviews. This was the language he was most fluent in. This was where he knew exactly who he was. The next 3 hours disappeared the way they always did. Not in a blur exactly, but in a kind of focused tunnel, where one problem dissolved into the next, and the clock moved differently. By 2 p.m., the Reinhardt situation had been handed to outside counsel with a clear strategy. By 2:30, the draft counter-narrative was approved and quietly distributed to 3 journalists they trusted. By 2:45, Victor was in his 4th consecutive meeting, a product review for the new enterprise interface, and his mind was running at full capacity, and he was saying exactly the right things. And then his phone lit up on the conference table, and he saw the number. The Sunshine Learning Center. He held up one finger to the product team. "Give me 30 seconds. He stepped into the hallway and answered. "Mr. Hayes," Clara's voice. "I just wanted to catch you before the pickup rush. Leah had a great afternoon. She really opened up after lunch." "She did." He could hear his own voice change. Something in it loosened slightly, the professional register dropping just a notch. "She talked my ear off, actually, about a cartoon involving animated vegetables." Yes, there was a smile in Clara's voice that he could hear distinctly even through the phone. She knows a remarkable amount about the internal politics of animated vegetables. Despite himself, despite the conference room full of people waiting for him 30 feet away, and the 412 employees, and the term sheet, and the Frankfurt counter-narrative. Victor laughed. A short, real sound that surprised him with how much he needed it. "That's accurate," he said. "She also asked me 3 times when you were coming." The laugh faded. 3 times. "I told her 3 o'clock. She's been watching the door since about 2:30. A pause. "She really loves you, Mr. Hayes. It comes off her like a signal." He didn't say anything for a moment. "I'll be there at 3, he said finally. "On time. Right door this time." She laughed softly. "We'll be here." He hung up, stood in the hallway outside the conference room. Through the glass wall, he could see his team waiting, the product manager with her presentation up on the screen, the developers looking at their laptops, Marcus at the end of the table, checking his phone with the contained urgency of a man managing 3 crises at once. Victor looked at the time. 2:47. He opened the conference room door. "I need to wrap this up by 3. Let's move." He made it to Sunshine Learning Center at 2:58 p.m. The parking lot was already filling up with other parents' minivans and SUVs idling in a loose queue. Mothers and fathers checking phones. A few grandparents standing near the entrance with the comfortable patience of people who had done this 100 times before. Victor pulled into an open spot, cut the engine, and for a moment just sat there. He realized he was nervous. Not the controlled tension of the Callaway room. This was something different, something less disciplined. He was about to walk through those doors, and either Leah was okay or she wasn't, and all the deal-making and crisis management in the world hadn't given him any ability to influence which one it was going to be. He got out of the car. He was halfway to the door when it opened, and Leah came through it at a dead run. She hit him at knee-height, first arms wrapped around his legs, and he caught her and swung her up in one motion, and she was talking before she even had her balance. A completely incoherent rush of words about butterflies and blue paint, and a boy named Marcus. Not your Marcus. Daddy, a different Marcus, who had knocked over her block tower, and Clara had made him apologize, and then they'd built it back together, and it was actually taller than the first one. Whoa, whoa. He was laughing. "Take a breath." She took a breath. Her face was flushed. Her yellow dress had a small smear of orange paint on the collar, and her eyes were bright in a way they hadn't been this morning, that particular brightness of a child who has had a very full day and is now unloading it onto the person they trust most. "Did you have a good day?" he asked. "I had a great day," she said with the emphasis of someone who had recently discovered superlatives. "And guess what?" "What?" "Clara said I could come back tomorrow." Something moved in his chest, a complicated, warm, slightly unsteady thing. "She did?" "She did." Leah pulled at his collar urgently. Can I come back tomorrow instead of the other school?" "We'll talk about it, Bug." "Dad?" "We'll talk about it." He set her down and kept her hand and turned toward the entrance where Clara Matthews was standing in the doorway. She had her jacket on now, keys in hand, end-of-day posture. But she was watching Leah with the kind of expression that didn't require any translation. "Thank you," Victor said. He said it simply, without the managed professional warmth he used for most human interactions. Just the 2 words, nothing around them. "She was great," Clara said. "I mean that. Once she settled in, she was a whole different kid. She's smart, Mr. Hayes, really observant. She noticed things I'd had on my wall for 6 months and asked me about every single one." "She does that," he said. And then, because Clara's tone invited it, he added, "She does that at home too. She sees things." "Where do you think she gets it from?" He wasn't sure how to answer that. He settled for, "Her mother was very perceptive." The past tense sat in the air between them, and he saw Clara register it without pressing on it, which told him something about her. "She made you something," Clara said. She reached back inside the doorway and came out with a sheet of construction paper. On it, in blue and purple paint, was a shape that might generously be interpreted as a butterfly. In the bottom corner, in Clara's neat handwriting, because Leah couldn't write yet, it said, "For Daddy, love, Leah." He took it from her. He looked at it for a long moment. She picked the colors herself, Clara said quietly. Blue because it's your favorite, she said, and purple because it's hers. She said that, first thing she told me about you. My daddy's favorite color is blue. I think she was trying to find common ground. Victor looked up from the painting. He found he didn't have an immediate response prepared, which was unusual for him. He was accustomed to having a response ready. He was accustomed to knowing exactly what to say in any given room. She did good, he finally said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Clara smiled that same genuine smile from this morning, nothing performed about it. She really did. Leah was pulling at his hand again, already re-energized, and narrating the second half of the Marcus and the Block Tower story at full volume. He let himself be pulled, took 2 steps toward the parking lot, and then turned back. Ms. Matthews. Clara looked up. Seriously. Today was you stepped in when you didn't have to. You didn't know us. You didn't owe us anything. He paused. That mattered. She looked at him steadily for a moment. That's the job, Mr. Hayes. Maybe, he said, but it felt like more than the job. She didn't answer right away, and in the pause Leah said very loudly, Clara is my best friend, Daddy, which broke whatever register the conversation had been operating in and made both of them laugh. High praise, Clara said, looking down at Leah. The highest, Leah confirmed seriously. In the car on the way home, Leah fell asleep before they hit the second traffic light. She did it the same way she always did, one moment fully awake and talking about animated vegetables and best friends and the correct technique for finger painting, and the next moment completely gone, head tipped sideways. Mr. Buttons pressed against her cheek. Victor drove in the quiet. He had 23 unread emails waiting. He had a call with outside counsel scheduled for 5:30. He had a draft press release that needed his sign-off before tomorrow morning and a board member in Phoenix who'd texted twice asking for a call about the Frankfurt situation. He drove past the turnoff to the highway and took the longer way home without planning to. The butterfly painting was on the back seat face up. He'd been running Hayes Technologies for 8 years. He'd built it from 11 employees in a leased office in Austin to over 400 people across 3 countries. He knew how to read a balance sheet at midnight and how to keep his voice level in a room where everything was going sideways, and how to make investors believe in something that didn't fully exist yet, because he believed in it first. What he did not know, what he had been quietly avoiding knowing in the way that busy people avoid confronting things they can't schedule a solution for, was what his daughter saw when she looked at him. Not the CEO, not the provider, the protector, the man who paid the mortgage and made sure she had her vaccinations and knew every word to her bedtime story. But him, Victor. What she saw in his face in the unguarded moments. Whether he was actually present when he was in the room with her, or whether his body was there and his mind was already somewhere in Frankfurt. She really loves you. It comes off her like a signal. He stopped at a red light, glanced in the rearview mirror at Leah's sleeping face. She'd painted him a butterfly, blue for his favorite color, purple for hers. And she'd told a stranger about his favorite color within 20 minutes of meeting her, because at 3 years old, the most important thing she knew about her father. The anchor fact. The first thing she reached for when she needed to explain who he was to someone new was that he liked blue. He thought about what else she might say. About his phone. About his briefcase. About the mornings when he was so far inside his own head that he gave her dinosaur eggs and said, wow, and really without hearing a word of what she was telling him. The light changed. He drove. He thought about Clara Matthews the way she'd said that's the job like she meant it and believed it and found it genuinely satisfying, which was the kind of uncomplicated integrity he'd stopped expecting from people somewhere around his 3rd year of running a company. And everyone around him had started telling him only what they thought he wanted to hear. He thought about Leah choosing the colors. Blue for him, purple for her. Right there in the middle of the first day in a classroom she hadn't planned to be in, with a teacher she'd never met before, his daughter had known exactly what mattered. He pulled into the driveway, carried Leah inside without waking her. put her down on the couch with Mr. Buttons and a blanket, and she made a small sound and resettled and didn't open her eyes. He sat down in the chair across from her. The butterfly painting was in his hand. He set it on the coffee table. He picked up his phone. The 5:30 call. The emails. The press release. The Phoenix board member. He set it back down. He sat there for a while. Outside, the evening was moving in the particular slow light of an autumn afternoon, in the city, going gold, going long. Leah breathed steadily on the couch. Mr. Buttons had slipped sideways, and Victor reached over and straightened him, without thinking about it. He looked at his daughter's sleeping face and thought, I am missing this. Not occasionally, regularly, structurally, built into the architecture of my days as an acceptable loss. It wasn't a new thought, but it was the first time in a long time that it didn't feel like a problem he could table for a later quarter. He looked at the butterfly painting, blue and purple. He picked up his phone and sent a text to Marcus. 5:30, needs to move to 6:30. Family first tonight. Marcus responded in 90 seconds. Copy that. Everything okay? Victor looked at his daughter. Yeah, he typed back. Think so. He put the phone face down on the table. And for the first time all day, he stopped calculating what came next. He didn't sleep well. Not because of Frankfurt outside counsel had the Reinhardt situation contained enough that it stopped feeling like a 5-alarm fire and settled into the dull procedural ache of a legal dispute that would resolve itself over the next 60 to 90 days. Not because of Callaway. Thursday's signing was locked. Derek had confirmed it in writing, and Marcus had already drafted the internal announcement. Not because of the Phoenix board member who turned out to just want reassurance, which Victor provided in 11 minutes on the 6:30 call, with the particular practiced calm of a man who had reassured nervous board members for most of his adult life. He didn't sleep well because of a question he couldn't stop turning over. Can I come back tomorrow instead of the other school? Leah had asked it twice more over dinner once, with full intensity, fork in hand. Sweet potatoes untouched, staring at him across the table, with the absolute focused urgency of a small person who needed an answer right now. And once quietly, just before bed, almost to herself, in the way she sometimes processed things aloud while he was reading to her, as if she'd forgotten he was listening and was just working it out. Oakwood has the art room, he'd said at dinner, and the outdoor track, and Ava and Sophie are going to be there. I don't know Ava and Sophie yet, Leah said. I know Clara. You've known Clara for one day. I know. She said this without any sense that it weakened her argument. She smells like paint, and she fixed Marcus's feelings. Which Marcus? The little one. He had not had a response to that. He'd enrolled Leah at Oakwood 8 months ago on the wait list the same week he'd called to set up the nanny share and the pediatrician and the emergency contact tree, all the infrastructure of solo parenthood that he'd built around himself with the same systematic efficiency he applied to company operations because if he made it a project, he could manage it, and if he could manage it, he didn't have to feel it. Oakwood had the best academic reviews of any preschool in the district. It had a progressive curriculum with a math readiness component that the early childhood development research supported. It had 2 of Leah's future kindergarten classmates already enrolled. He'd chosen it the way he chose everything, with data, with research, with the confidence of a man who solved problems by collecting sufficient information and applying it correctly. He lay in the dark at 1:15 a.m. and wondered if he'd missed something in the data. Not about the school, about the fact that a 3-year-old girl had spent her first day at a place she'd never planned to be, and ended it saying she'd had a great day. Capital letters and everything. He'd built his whole professional life on the principle that preparation and planning created outcomes. But Leah hadn't planned to be at Sunshine Learning Center. She'd been dragged there by a distracted father who'd taken the wrong exit on a bad morning. There was no research involved, no waitlist, no academic review, and she'd painted him a butterfly in blue and purple and come out the door at a dead run. He fell asleep somewhere after 2 a.m. and woke up at 5:15 to his alarm and lay there for a moment before he reached for his phone. One email from Marcus Frankfurt, update nothing new. One calendar reminder, Leah school 8:30 a.m. It didn't say which school. He let her sleep until 6:30, which was later than he usually allowed on weekdays. When he went in to wake her, she was already partially conscious, lying on her back, talking to Mr. Buttons in a low, serious voice about something involving a cloud that had been rude to a duck. Victor stood in the doorway and listened for a moment. "Morning, Bug." She turned her head. Her hair was a spectacular disaster. "Is it a school day?" "It is." She sat up. "Which school?" He sat on the edge of her bed. She immediately climbed into his lap, which she did every morning, and which he had recently been informed by a parenting book he'd read at 11 p.m. 3 months ago was a critical attachment behavior that he should not hurry through. He had not hurried through it since. "I want to ask you something," he said. She looked up at him, waiting. "Yesterday, what was the thing you liked best about Sunshine?" She didn't have to think about it. "Clara," she said. "What about her?" Leah pulled Mr. Buttons onto her lap. "She talked to me like I was big," she said. "Not like a baby." He looked at her. "What do you mean? When Marcus knocked over my tower, she didn't say, 'Oh no, your tower.' She said, 'Leah, what do you want to do about it?' Like I could decide." She adjusted Mr. Buttons with great seriousness. "I decided to build it back, taller." Victor was quiet for a moment. "You told me it was taller the second time." "It was," Leah said with complete conviction. Then she looked up. "Can we go back?" He kissed the top of her chaotic hair. "Yeah," he said. "Let's go back." He hadn't called ahead. It occurred to him in the car that the polite, organized thing to do would have been to call Dr. Park's office and formally initiate an enrollment inquiry before simply showing up again, but the thought arrived alongside the awareness that they were already 2 blocks from Sunshine Learning Center, and Leah was singing something under her breath that he recognized as a song she hadn't known yesterday morning. A new song, learned in one day. He pulled into the parking lot. Same lot from yesterday, same sign, Sunshine Learning Center. Where every child shines, and Leah had her seatbelt unbuckled before he'd fully stopped the car, which they had a rule about, and which he enforced with precisely 0 effectiveness this particular morning. "Walk," he said, "not run." She walked at approximately the pace of a slow run. The same receptionist from yesterday was at the front desk. She looked up when they came in, and there was a micro-expression not quite surprised, something closer to recognition mixed with cautious goodwill. "Mr. Hayes." "Good morning. I was hoping to speak to Dr. Park about formal enrollment, if she has a few minutes." "She comes in at 8. The receptionist glanced at the clock, 7:52. "If you want to wait." "Absolutely." He looked at Leah, who had already craned her neck toward the hallway to the classrooms. "Is Ms. Matthews in yet?" As if the question had summoned her, Clara appeared from around the corner. She had paint on her left hand, fresh, not yesterday's, and she was carrying a large sheet of paper with what looked like a half-finished mural on it. She stopped when she saw them. Her face did a thing he noticed, not the polite professional smile of someone being paid to be welcoming, but the unguarded expression of someone who is genuinely pleased to see a particular person. It was quick, barely a second, and it was directed at Leah first, which made sense. But it was there. "You came back," Clara said. "I made a decision," Leah announced. Clara crouched down to her level, the mural paper balanced in one arm. "Did you?" "I decided this is my school." Clara looked up at Victor. He shrugged slightly, one corner of his mouth moving. "She decided," he said. "I heard." Clara looked back at Leah. "Well, I think that's a very good decision." She straightened up. "Dr. Park will be happy to hear it. She mentioned you this morning, asked how yesterday went." "Hopefully the report was decent," Victor said. "Mostly decent. I may have mentioned the pterodactyl eggs." He blinked. "She told you about the pterodactyl eggs." "She told everyone," Clara said with that same smile that had actual warmth in its architecture, not just social courtesy. It came up during the morning share circle. She stood up and said, "My daddy makes dinosaur eggs, but they're actually pterodactyl eggs." The other kids were very interested. Something about the image Leah standing up in a circle of children she'd met the day before, sharing this ridiculous thing, owning it, moved through Victor's chest in a way he didn't fully understand. "I'll add it to the resume," he said. Dr. Park arrived at 8:03. She was a small, practical woman in her 50s, who moved and spoke with the contained efficiency of someone who had spent 20 years running a child-centered institution and had learned that children and their parents were approximately equally unpredictable. She shook Victor's hand, ushered Leah toward Clara's room. Leah went without any of yesterday's reluctance, already talking, and then led Victor into her office. She offered coffee. He accepted. They sat across from each other with the coffee between them, and she looked at him with an expression that was pleasantly evaluative. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I'll be straightforward with you. Please. We have a wait list for this academic year, 15 families, some of whom have been waiting since January." She held his gaze. "I'm going to recommend to our enrollment committee that Leah be moved to the front of that list. I want to explain why before you say anything." He nodded. "In the 9 years I've run Sunshine, I can count on one hand the number of children who walked into this building for the first time under stressful circumstances and ended their day the way Leah ended hers yesterday. She came in crying and she left talking. What happened between those two things is Clara, but it's also Leah. Some children have a readiness for connection that is genuinely rare at that age. Leah has it." She picked up her coffee. "This school has a culture that rewards that quality. I would like Leah to be part of that culture." Victor looked at her. "That's a generous explanation." "It's an honest one." She set the coffee down. "I'll also tell you that Clara requested specifically that I consider it, for whatever that's worth." He thought about that for a moment. "It's worth something," he said. "I thought it might be." Dr. Park pulled out a folder. "I'll need the standard enrollment forms, health records, and emergency contacts by Thursday. And I'll need you to sign off on the revised tuition agreement. Our rates are different from Oakwood, which I suspect is why some families look elsewhere. We're not inexpensive, but we're transparent." "I appreciate transparent," Victor said. "Good." She slid the folder across to him. "Then I'll see Leah on Monday as a fully enrolled student." "She'll be here tomorrow," Victor said. Dr. Park raised an eyebrow. "She'll be here tomorrow," he repeated. "I'll have everything signed by end of business today." A small smile crossed Dr. Park's face. "Then I'll see her tomorrow." He stayed for pickup that afternoon, too. It was deliberate. He'd moved 2 calls, shortened a review meeting, and told Marcus he'd be out of pocket from 2:45 to 4 o'clock, and Marcus had looked at him with an expression that Victor recognized as the look of a man revising his mental model of something. "Everything okay?" Marcus had asked. "Everything's fine," Victor said. "My daughter started a new school. I want to be there when she gets out." Marcus had nodded slowly in the way of someone who was recalculating. "I'll hold anything that isn't on fire." "That's all I'm asking." He got to Sunshine at 2:50. Other parents were already assembling in the pickup area, the same collection of faces from yesterday, the comfortable, easy cluster of people who had already been through this, who knew each other by first name, and compared notes about sleep schedules and snack preferences. He stood slightly apart, phone in his jacket pocket, with a physical act of will. Clara brought the kids out in a loose group at 3:02. She was talking to one of the other parents, a father about his age, easy and familiar, clearly someone she knew well. And Leah was at her side, gripping her hand and scanning the pickup crowd with that focused attention she'd inherited from some combination of both her parents. When Leah saw Victor, she let go of Clara's hand and came toward him. But this time, she didn't run. She walked with great deliberate dignity, carrying something in both hands, a piece of cardboard with something mounted on it. She stopped in front of him and held it up. It was a painting, more elaborate than the butterfly, a house, two stick figures, one large and one small. And above them, a sun with a face on it, and along the bottom edge in Clara's handwriting, "My Family." By Leah Hayes, age 3. The two stick figures were holding hands. He crouched down to look at it properly. "Who's this?" he asked, pointing to the large figure. "You," she said. "And this one?" "Me." She studied it critically. "I made your head too big." "Honestly, pretty accurate." She giggled a full, unguarded 3-year-old giggle that completely dismantled something in his chest, and he took the painting from her carefully and stood up. Clara was a few feet away, the other parent now gone, watching with a quiet expression. "She worked on it all afternoon," she said, "kept changing things." "What was she changing?" "She added the sun twice, painted over it once, added it again." Clara tilted her head. She said the first one didn't look happy enough. Victor looked at the sun with its hand-drawn smile. He thought about that about his 3-year-old daughter deciding that the sun in her family portrait needed to look happy enough. About what that meant, she was thinking about while her small hands worked with the paint. "She's something else," he said. He said it simply, not as a performance. "She really is," Clara said. They stood there for a moment in the mild afternoon, the sound of other children and parents moving around them, and something in the silence between them was not uncomfortable, which surprised him, because he was generally very uncomfortable with silences that had no agenda. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Sure." "Yesterday you said that thing about how her love for me comes off her like a signal." He paused. "How did you know to say that?" Clara seemed to consider the question seriously rather than deflecting it. "I've been teaching this age group for 4 years, she said. "You get a feel for how kids hold the people they love. The way they talk about them, the way they look for them in a crowd." She glanced at Leah, who had found a friend and was now engaged in some intense negotiation over a plastic bucket. "Leah holds you very carefully, like something she doesn't want to drop." He looked at his daughter across the pickup yard. "She lost her mother," he said, "when she was 14 months old." He didn't usually say that to people he'd known for 2 days. He was not entirely sure why he said it now, but something in Clara's directness, the way she answered questions like they deserved real answers, made him respond in kind. Clara was quiet for a moment. "I'm sorry," she said. Not the rote condolence, something more present and specific. "It's been 2 years," he said. She doesn't remember, which is, I don't know if that's easier or harder. For her. For me, it's both at the same time. "That makes sense," Clara said. She said it without rushing past it or trying to resolve it, which he appreciated more than he could readily explain. He looked back at her. She wasn't looking at him with pity, which he'd learned to recognize and quietly despise over the last 2 years. She was looking at him with the same steady attention she'd had in every interaction since yesterday morning, like he was a full sentence that deserved to be read to the end. "She's lucky to have you," Clara said. "I made a wrong turn and dropped her at the wrong school," he said. "And here you are, 2 days in a row, early for pickup." She held his gaze. "That's the part that counts, Mr. Hayes." Leah came running back with the plastic bucket and an important announcement about what they were going to put in it, and the conversation was over. Victor spent Thursday morning at Callaway Capital for the formal signing. Patrick Callaway had a bottle of 18-year scotch waiting. Derek poured it. Miriam Cho signed the due diligence sign-off with the same precise movements she did everything with, then actually smiled, which Derek later told Victor he'd seen perhaps twice in 3 years. They signed the papers at 11:15 a.m. Patrick shook Victor's hand, the two-handed shake again, but this time Victor felt the difference in it. Not performance. Actual warmth. "You've built something real," Patrick said. "That doesn't happen by accident." "No," Victor agreed. "It doesn't." He was out of the building by noon. He sat in the car for a moment with the folder of signed documents, and he waited for the feeling that usually came after a deal closed the particular high of completion, the surge that had carried him through every milestone Hayes Technologies had passed. The IPO, the first major acquisition. The first time he'd been on the cover of a technology trade magazine, looking at the camera with an expression that Marcus had called aggressively confident, and which Victor preferred to think of as prepared. The feeling came. It was real. He'd worked for this, and it mattered, and he felt it. But it was smaller than it used to be. Not in a diminished way, in a calibrated way. Like the volume had been adjusted to the correct level after years of being too loud. He drove to pick up Leah at 3. She was sitting on the front steps with Clara when he pulled in, both of them, with their heads bent over something on the ground that turned out on closer inspection to be a caterpillar they had discovered on the front walk. Leah was delivering an extremely detailed monologue about what caterpillars ate most of, which appeared to be incorrect, and Clara was listening with complete seriousness. Victor stood at the edge of the walk and watched them for a moment before either noticed he was there. He watched his daughter's face open, animated, unguarded, and he watched Clara listening, asking a question that made Leah's eyebrows go up with the excitement of having a new thing to consider, and something settled in him that had been unsteady for longer than he could accurately date. Clara looked up. She saw his face before he could arrange it into anything more managed, and he watched her register what was on it, and she didn't say anything about it, just held his gaze for a second, and then looked back at Leah. "Leah," she said, "your dad's here." Leah looked up. "Daddy, there's a caterpillar." "I can see that. It's going to be a butterfly." He walked over and crouched down to look at the caterpillar, which was small and determined and entirely unconcerned with any of them. "How do you know?" "Clara told me." Leah looked up at Clara with complete confidence. "She said it builds a little house around itself, and then when it comes out it's different. Bigger. With wings." Victor looked at the caterpillar. Then he looked at Clara. "She asked me what a cocoon was," Clara explained. "During reading time, I may have gone down a rabbit hole." "An educational rabbit hole," he said. "The only kind we have here." Leah stood up abruptly, mission apparently complete. "Can Clara come to dinner?" she asked. The question dropped into the afternoon like a stone into still water. Victor straightened up. Clara made a small sound that might have been the beginning of a polite deflection, but Leah was already continuing unstoppable with the freight train logic of a 3-year-old who had identified a solution to a problem and was executing. "Because we had a good day, and when you have a good day, you're supposed to celebrate," she said. "That's a rule." "Where did you hear that rule?" Victor asked. "Clara said it." Both adults looked at each other. Clara's expression had the quality of someone trying not to smile and failing slightly. "That was about celebrating finishing your art project," Clara said to Leah carefully. "It still counts," Leah said. "She's not wrong," Victor said. He found himself saying the next thing before he'd made a conscious decision, to which was unusual for him. "I mean, if you don't have plans, we're not doing anything formal. Leah's idea of celebrating is grilled cheese and a movie she's already seen 40 times. Clara looked at him, the same steady look reading him to the end of the sentence. "Grilled cheese is my favorite," she said. "Is it really?" he asked. "No," she admitted. "But I like it well enough." Leah grabbed her hand. "Then it's settled," she announced in a tone that was an almost perfect imitation of something she had clearly heard Victor say during one of his phone calls, and both of them laughed a real laugh, simultaneous, unplanned, and Leah looked between them with the satisfied expression of someone whose plan had come together exactly as intended. They took 2 cars. Leah insisted on this for reasons she could not fully articulate, but which she held with great conviction, and so Victor led and Clara followed. And he spent the 15 minutes driving home intermittently aware that he was slightly nervous, which was information about himself that he received with a mixture of recognition and something he'd have to sit with later. She was a preschool teacher he'd met 3 days ago. She'd been kind to his daughter in a moment when he'd been failing to be present. That was all. He pulled into the driveway and waited for her to park. She got out of her car and stood in the early evening light and looked at the house, and he didn't say anything while she did. "It's a lot of house for two people," she observed, not critically, just noting a fact. "Mrs. Paulson makes it feel populated," he said. "She's our housekeeper, currently in Tampa." "So it's just the two of you this week?" "Just the two of us." Leah was already pulling at the front door with both hands and complaining about the lock, and they both moved toward her at the same time, and their shoulders almost touched, and Victor unlocked the door, and Leah burst through it into the house and started narrating which movie she wanted and why. He stood back and let Clara in first. She crossed the threshold and stopped just inside, taking in the entryway, the family photos on the wall, the small collection of Leah's artwork already accumulating on the refrigerator, the butterfly painting from Monday in a frame he'd put up last night. She saw the frame. She looked at it for a long moment. Then she looked at him. He felt his face do something he couldn't control. "I had a frame," he said, which was not an adequate explanation, and they both knew it. "I see that," Clara said quietly. And then Leah called from the kitchen with the specific urgency of a 3-year-old who has decided that grilled cheese needed to happen immediately, and they both went to answer. The grilled cheese was Victor's fault. Not the idea that had been Leah's, obviously, but the execution, which he'd approached with the same systematic confidence he brought to quarterly planning, and which had produced, after 8 minutes on the stove, 2 sandwiches that were aggressively golden on the outside and insufficiently melted on the inside. He stood at the counter looking at them with an expression that Clara, sitting at the kitchen island with a glass of water and Leah's ongoing color commentary, recognized as a man confronting evidence that a thing he thought he was competent at was more complicated than he'd assessed. "They look great," Clara said. "They're burnt on the bottom," he said. "They have character. The cheese isn't melted." "Daddy," Leah said with the patient authority of someone who had been waiting for her dinner for several decades, "just put it on the plate." He put it on the plate. Leah took one bite and declared it the best grilled cheese she'd ever had, which was either genuine 3-year-old enthusiasm or extraordinary diplomatic skill, and Clara took a bite of hers and chewed it thoughtfully and said, "Okay, it's actually pretty good." And Victor tasted his own and decided that character was in fact an accurate description. They ate at the kitchen island. The formal dining table was in a room he used primarily as an overflow workspace and hadn't set for an actual meal in longer than he could honestly recall. Leah sat between them on her booster seat and ate half her sandwich, and then began a very specific campaign to be allowed to watch her movie in the living room while the adults stayed in the kitchen, which she framed as being generous to them by giving them grown-up talking time. "That's very thoughtful," Victor said. "But I know what you're doing." "I'm doing grown-up talking time," Leah said with absolute conviction. He looked at Clara. She raised her eyebrows. "Once your call." He looked back at Leah. 20 minutes. Then bed. 45. 25. "Deal," Leah said instantly, which told him she'd planned for this negotiation, and she was off the booster seat and in the living room before he'd fully processed that he'd been outmaneuvered by a 3-year-old at his own kitchen table. Clara was smiling into her water glass. "You're aware she knew exactly what she was doing," she said. "Completely aware," Victor said. "It doesn't help. She does it at school too. She'll suggest a trade to the other kids that sounds fair to everyone, but always ends slightly in her favor." Clara set her glass down. "She's going to be very good at something someday. I'm not sure what." "Her mother was like that," Victor said. The words arrived without the usual careful management he applied to that particular subject. He noticed it, but didn't retract. Clara looked at him with the same quiet attention she'd been giving him since the front porch. What was she like? He picked up his water glass. Smart. Organized. She could read a room in 10 seconds and know exactly what it needed. Better with people than I am. He paused. She was a hospitality executive, hotels, knew how to make people feel welcome in a way that I understand intellectually but don't fully have access to myself. I don't know that I'd agree with that last part, Clara said. He looked at her. You've been pretty decent at making people feel at ease all week, she said, under fairly chaotic circumstances. I've had a lot of help, he said. She didn't deflect it or deny it. She just held his gaze and said, Tell me about her, if you want. He wasn't sure if he wanted to. He thought about it honestly for a moment, the way she'd been asking him to think about things all week to the end of the sentence, past the prepared response. Her name was Diane, he said. We met when she was managing a boutique hotel in Austin where I had a pitch dinner. She upgraded my room, and I thought it was because she liked me, and she told me 2 years later that she'd upgraded me because the original room had a plumbing issue she hadn't had time to fix yet. He heard himself almost smile at the memory. She found that much funnier than I did. Clara laughed softly. She sounds like someone who appreciated a good story. She collected them, he said. She had this thing she did whenever something went wrong. She'd say, Okay, this is going to be a very good story someday. Burst pipe in the hotel, the week of a major conference, very good story. Car breakdown on the way to our rehearsal dinner, excellent story. He paused. She was about 3 months pregnant with Leah when she got the diagnosis. She called me from the doctor's office, and the first thing she said was, I need you to know right now that this is going to be a very good story. The kitchen was quiet, except for the low sound of the cartoon from the living room. Did she get to tell it? Clara asked. Not the ending, he said, but she got most of it. He looked at his hands on the counter. She made me promise 2 things before she died. One was that Leah would know who she was. The other was that I'd stop working on Sundays. Have you kept them? The first one, yes. The second one, he exhaled. I've been working on it. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Do you know what I notice about the way you talk about her? What? You don't perform grief, she said. Some parents, when they've lost a spouse, when it comes up, you can feel them constructing the emotion for the listener, making sure you see them feeling it the right way. She looked at him directly. You just talk about her like she was real, like you're still figuring out how to account for the space she took up. He looked at her. The kitchen was warm. From the living room, Leah said something to the television, and there was a small, decisive thump that was probably her settling deeper into the couch cushions. That's exactly what it is, he said. She nodded, didn't say anything else, which was exactly right. After a moment he said, Okay, tell me something. About you. She seemed mildly surprised, not that he'd asked, but maybe at the directness of it. What do you want to know? Same question. What are you still figuring out? She considered this seriously. I grew up in Cincinnati, middle of 5 kids. My parents are... I love them, but they're the kind of people who always knew exactly what everyone in the family was going to be by the time they were in middle school. My brother Daniel was going to be an engineer. My sister Pam was going to be a nurse. My other sister was going to teach high school English. She turned her water glass in her hands. I told them I wanted to teach preschool, and my dad said, Clara, you're too smart for that. What did you say? I said, Dad, you're going to feel pretty bad about that someday. She smiled. And then I moved to the city and took the job at Sunshine and called him after my first week and told him that I'd been challenged more in 5 days than in 4 years of college, and there was this long pause on the phone, and then he said, All right, I feel bad about it. Victor laughed a full laugh, not the courteous version. Did he actually say that? Verbatim. My dad's a very literal man. She looked at her glass. I'm still figuring out what comes next, I think. Whether I go back and get a graduate degree, whether I want to run a program myself someday like Dr. Park, whether I'm in the right city. She looked up. Whether the things I thought I'd have by now are still coming, or whether I've been telling myself a story about timing. "What things?" he asked. She met his eyes. "The usual things," she said. "The things that matter." He understood what she meant. He didn't press. From the living room, Leah called out, "Daddy, it's the good part," with the urgency of someone who needed a witness. He held Clara's gaze for one more second. Then he said, "Should we go see the good part?" She smiled. "I think we should." They watched the movie, all 47 minutes of it, well past the negotiated 25, with Leah between them on the couch and Mr. Buttons on her lap. Leah provided running commentary and fell asleep in the last 10 minutes mid-sentence, the way she always did, with the abrupt totality of someone cutting a power line. Victor carried her to bed, tucked her in, stood in the doorway for a moment the same way he had the night before the wrong school morning, and again the feeling hit him fiercer now somehow than it had been then. Love and guilt still braided, but with something new threaded through them, something that felt like the beginning of intention. He came back out to the living room, and Clara was standing by the front door with her jacket and keys, not making a production of leaving, but clearly making a graceful exit. "Thank you for dinner," she said. "I burned the sandwiches. Best burned sandwiches I've had in years." She pulled her jacket on. "She's really good, Victor. I need you to hear that from me as someone who does this for a living, and not just as something people say. She's going to be a remarkable kid." He heard the shift the first time she'd used his name, not Mr. Hayes, and he filed it away without comment. "I know," he said. "She is." He looked at her. "I feel like I'm catching up. Like there's this version of being her father that I should have been doing all along, and I'm only just finding the entrance." "That's exactly what it is," Clara said, echoing his own words from the kitchen back to him so precisely and so gently that it hit him sideways. He opened the front door. The evening was cool and quiet. She stepped out onto the front porch and turned. "Same time tomorrow," she said. He looked at her. "Pick up," she clarified. "She does better when you're early." "I know," he said. "I'll be there." She walked to her car. He watched until she pulled out of the driveway. Then he closed the door and stood in the entryway in the quiet house and looked at the butterfly painting in its frame on the wall. Blue and purple. He stood there a while. 2 months passed the way months do, when something in a life is genuinely rearranging, not all at once, not in any one dramatic gesture, but in the cumulative weight of small, consistent choices made differently than they'd been made before. Victor started leaving the office at 5 p.m. 3 days a week. Not sneaking out, actually leaving, telling Marcus, building it into the structure of the day, like the Callaway meeting, or the Frankfurt calls, with the same non-negotiable weight. Marcus adjusted. The team adjusted. Nothing catastrophic happened, which should not have been as surprising as it was. He made it to Sunshine for pickup every one of those days. Sometimes early enough to stand with the other parents and exchange the small talk of people whose primary common ground was that they all had someone in room 2. He learned names. He learned that the father he'd noticed talking to Clara, his name was Tom. He was a pediatric nurse, and his son Marcus, the real one, was Leah's primary block tower collaborator, was one of the original parents from Sunshine's first enrollment year, and had a working knowledge of every staff member's coffee order. He learned that the grandmother who stood near the entrance every Tuesday and Thursday was raising her grandson alone, and had been for 3 years, and talked about it the way Clara talked about hard things, directly, without performance. He stopped sending emails during pickup. He stopped checking the phone. He started picking Leah up and asking her the same 2 questions every day. What was the best thing and what was the hard thing, a framework Clara had mentioned to him in passing one afternoon, as something she used in the classroom's daily closing circle. A way of teaching children that good days and hard days weren't opposites, that both could live in the same afternoon and both were worth naming. Leah took to it immediately. The answers were wild and specific and sometimes heartbreaking. In their smallness, the best thing was that the paint was a new shade of orange. The hard thing was that her crackers broke wrong at snack time. But sometimes the answers stopped him cold. 3 weeks in on a Tuesday, Leah's best thing was, "You came early and I saw you first." He'd been standing at the edge of the pickup area, phone in his pocket, and she'd spotted him through the window before Clara brought them out. And that was the best thing about her whole day. Not the painting, not the story circle, not the new game with the real Marcus. Him, standing in a parking lot 10 minutes early. He thought about that for the rest of the week. He and Clara found their rhythm gradually, the way rhythms actually form, not by design, but by repetition. Most afternoons he'd linger a few minutes after pickup, and most afternoons she'd have a few minutes before she had to wrap up the room, and they'd talk in that way people talk when they're being careful about something without fully admitting they're being careful about it. Work mostly. Books. What Leah had done that day. The state of things. She called him Victor almost exclusively now. He noticed when it had shifted 3 weeks ago on an afternoon when something had gone sideways with a staff situation at Sunshine, and she'd said his name while she was distracted, and then didn't correct it, and he didn't either, and that was that. He knew with the clarity he usually reserved for reading markets and balance sheets that something was forming between them. He also knew with equal clarity that he was not in a position to move on instinct the way he had in his 20s when the risk calculations were simpler. He had a daughter who had placed profound and specific trust in this woman. He had a school relationship that would become complicated in ways that could genuinely hurt Leah if he handled it wrong. He had his own history and all that it carried. So he was careful. And he thought Clara was being careful too, in her own way, for her own reasons. And for a while, careful was exactly right. The first thing that cracked it was a Friday afternoon in November. He came for pickup and found the parking lot quieter than usual, a few parents a thinner crowd, and realized as he got closer to the entrance that something had happened. Not a crisis, nothing in the alarm register, but a shift. One of the teachers, a young woman named Gabby, who'd been at Sunshine for 2 years, was in tears near the front door, talking to Dr. Park in a low, urgent voice. 2 of the other parents were standing nearby with the careful faces of people who had heard enough to be concerned, but not enough to understand. Tom was there, which usually meant he knew what was going on. Victor caught his eye. "Gabby's dad," Tom said quietly. "Got a call about 20 minutes ago. Heart attack. They're not sure yet." Victor looked at Gabby, young, maybe 23, holding her phone with both hands, Dr. Park's hand on her arm. He looked at the door to room 2. Clara was still inside with the remaining kids holding the afternoon together while the parking lot processed its own particular human weather. He went inside. Clara was at the back of the room with 4 kids, including Leah and the real Marcus, and they were doing something at the art table not structured, just the low-key end-of-day occupation of children who were waiting to be collected. She looked up when he came in, and he saw her read his face in the quick, precise way she had. "Gabby," she said. "Her dad. They don't know yet." Clara closed her eyes for a second. When she opened them, she was fully composed, not the suppressed feeling kind of composed, but the kind that comes from a person who has made peace with the fact that the world dispenses hard things without scheduling them, and who has decided in advance how they're going to meet that. "I'm going to go to her in a minute," she said. "As soon as these 4 are picked up." "I've got Leah," he said. "Take whatever time you need." She looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said. And then quietly, "I hate this part of the day. When something's wrong and you're still in the room holding it together." "Yes. I know that feeling," he said. She looked at him with something that was not quite a smile, more than that, and more complicated. "I know you do," she said. He gathered Leah, said goodbye to the real Marcus, and took his daughter out to the parking lot to wait. Leah asked why Miss Gabby was crying, and he told her that Miss Gabby's daddy was sick, and that was very scary and sad. And Leah thought about this with extreme seriousness, and then asked if they could draw Miss Gabby a picture, and he said yes, absolutely, they could do that tonight. He waited until he saw Clara come out and go to Gabby, and he watched Clara put her arm around the young teacher's shoulders, and he watched Gabby lean into it, and he watched Clara stand there holding the weight of it without flinching. He drove home thinking about Diane, about the phone call from the doctor's office, about the people who had stood next to him in that hallway, and held weight without being asked to. He pulled into the driveway, and Leah was already asking about the drawing supplies. That night, after Leah was asleep, Victor sat at the kitchen island with a glass of water and his phone, and he stared at Clara's name in his contacts for a while. Then he texted, "How is she?" The response came back 20 minutes later. "Scared. But Dad is stable. They think he'll be okay." A pause then. "How did you know to come in?" He thought about how to answer that. He typed, "Tom told me something was wrong. I knew you were in there with the kids, and I just wanted to show up." Another pause. Longer this time. Then, that meant something. To me and to Gabby both. He sat with that. Then he typed, "Clara, can I ask you something?" "Yes." He set the phone down, picked it up, set it down again. The butterfly painting was visible from where he was sitting in its frame on the wall, blue and purple. He looked at it for a moment. He picked up the phone and typed, "I'd like to take you to dinner. Not grilled cheese, actual dinner. Just the two of us." He read it back. Hit send before he talked himself into revising it. He set the phone down and waited. The response took 4 minutes, which he spent not looking at his phone with extreme deliberate discipline. "I'd like that," she wrote. Then, "But I need to say something first. Okay. Leah is my student. That matters to me, and it needs to stay mattering no matter what happens or doesn't happen. I'm not willing to let that get complicated." I know he wrote, "It won't." "You sound very sure about that." "I'm sure about the things I'm sure about," he typed. "This is one of them." Another pause. "Saturday," she wrote. "Saturday. Pick me up at 7, she wrote. "And don't burn anything." He laughed. Out loud alone in the kitchen at almost 11 at night, a real laugh. The house absorbed it and sent nothing back, and he didn't mind. Saturday arrived with the specific atmospheric pressure of a day that knows it's significant. He had made a reservation at a restaurant he'd been to twice once, for a business dinner once for Diane's birthday 7 years ago. He'd chosen it deliberately, not as a statement, but as a kind of honesty. Bringing someone to a place that held a memory was its own form of introduction. He picked Clara up at 7. She came out of her building in a dark green dress and a jacket, and she looked simply like herself, pulled together in the way of someone who doesn't need to perform being dressed up, who just is what she is in any register. He had not prepared a thing to say when she got in the car, which was unusual for him, and which turned out not to matter, because she looked at him and said immediately, "You're nervous." And he said, "Is it visible?" And she said, "A little." And that was somehow the right way for the evening to begin. The dinner was 3 hours. He couldn't have accounted for the full 3 hours afterward, not linearly, not the way he could reconstruct a meeting or a negotiation. What he could account for was fragments, the way she ordered without second-guessing herself, the way she asked about Frankfurt and actually listened to the answer and asked a follow-up that showed she'd heard the first part, the way she talked about Cincinnati and her father and the 5 siblings with a mix of exasperation and devotion that was so specifically the texture of a real family that he felt himself leaning toward it. The way she said at some point over coffee, "You're different from what I thought you were." And he asked what she'd thought, and she said, "Someone who had all the answers." "I used to think I did," he said. "What changed? A wrong turn," he said. "And a 3-year-old who picks the right colors." She looked at him across the table in the low light of the restaurant, and whatever careful thing she'd been doing for the past 2 months, whatever distance she'd been maintaining, with the quiet competence of someone who knew how to be responsible about something that mattered. He watched it shift, not disappear, just make room. "Victor," she said. "Yeah. I want you to know that I'm not going to treat this casually." She held his gaze. "I don't do casual. If that changes things—" "It doesn't change things," he said. She looked at him steadily. "Clara," he said. "I framed a finger painting." She looked down at the table, and her shoulders shook once with a laugh that she was trying to contain, and he watched her let it out, and felt something in the room adjust. The way rooms adjusted, he realized. Not when you performed confidence going in, but when you stopped pretending you'd already won. He drove her home. They said goodnight on the sidewalk in front of her building, and it was a short goodbye and a simple one. And when he drove home, the city moved past the windows, and he didn't think about Frankfurt or Callaway or Q4 projections or any of the coordinates he usually navigated by. He thought about Saturday, about green jackets and real laughs, and the first moment a careful thing stops being careful and starts being brave. He pulled into the driveway and sat in the car in the dark for a moment. Then he went inside and checked on Leah and found her asleep with Mr. Buttons and one arm thrown out wide, surrendered to the universe. He straightened the blanket. He went to bed, and he slept well. The months that followed moved with a different quality than any months Victor could remember in recent years. Not slower exactly. His life didn't slow down Hayes. Technologies didn't slow down the market, didn't slow down Marcus, didn't slow down. And Leah certainly didn't slow down. But something in the texture of the days changed. Like the difference between driving a road at 90 miles an hour and driving the same road at 60, you covered the same ground, but you could see things out the window. He and Clara didn't rush. That was the word she'd used on their second dinner 2 weeks after the first, when he'd asked her once carefully where she thought this was going. "I don't want to rush it," she'd said. "Not because I'm uncertain. Because I'm not. And that's exactly why." He'd understood that. It was the same logic he applied to the decisions that mattered most, the ones where you moved deliberately, because getting it wrong wasn't recoverable. They had dinners. They had afternoons with Leah at the park, where the rules were that nobody looked at their phones, and everyone had to go down the slide at least once, which Clara upheld with more enthusiasm than was strictly necessary, and which Leah found deeply satisfying. They had one night in December when the three of them made Christmas cookies, and Leah put so much red food coloring in the frosting that everything they made looked vaguely alarming, and they laughed about it until Leah was laughing too hard to stand up, which was the best kind of evening Victor knew how to have. Marcus noticed. Not in a dramatic way. Marcus wasn't dramatic, but in the way he started scheduling certain Fridays, as protected without being asked, and in the way he stopped texting after 7 p.m., unless something was genuinely on fire. One afternoon in January, he said very casually while they were reviewing Q1 projections, "You seem different." "Different how?" Victor asked. "Like you're inside the room," Marcus said. "All the way in. Not half in and half in Frankfurt." He looked back at his laptop. "It's better, for the room." Victor didn't say anything, but he thought about that for a while. Leah's transformation at Sunshine was the kind of thing that other parents noticed and mentioned to him in the pickup line. Not the flower of the week kind of comment, not the social courtesy of people who were filling silence genuinely unprompted observations. Tom said it first in February, standing near the entrance, waiting for the room 2 kids to come out. "Your daughter is different than she was in September. Something opened up in her." "I know," Victor said. "Clara does that," Tom said. "Not with all of them. But with some of them she finds the exact thing and opens it up and then just stands back and lets it happen. It's something to watch." He watched it every day. Leah talked more, asked more, pushed back, more in the specific healthy way of a child who had learned her voice was worth something. She had opinions about everything, about what books they read at bedtime, about the route they took to the grocery store, about whether scrambled eggs or fried eggs were objectively superior. She made arguments. She changed her mind when presented with new evidence and announced this without embarrassment, which was a quality Victor was trying to develop in himself with considerably more effort. She also started asking questions about Diane. Not constantly, not with distress, but with the careful regularity of a child who was learning to tend something important. Where did Mommy go? Did Mommy like painting? Would Mommy like Clara? That last question hit him at breakfast on a Tuesday in March. Leah asked it between bites of actual scrambled eggs, a real breakfast, because he'd been making real breakfasts with the same tone she used for everything, direct and without artifice. "Would Mommy like Clara?" He set his fork down. He thought about Diane's eye for people. The 10-second room read the instinct that never missed, the way she'd known the exact right thing to say to a stranger in a hotel lobby at 2 in the morning when everything had gone wrong. "Yeah," he said. "She really would." Leah nodded, satisfied, like she'd suspected as much, and was pleased to have it confirmed. "Good," she said, and ate her eggs. He sat there after Leah had moved on to the next thing. Something about the animated vegetables, a new development in the ongoing saga. And he held that small exchange in his mind and turned it over. And what he felt was not the grief-guilt combination that usually attended these moments. What he felt was something closer to rightness. A sense of the story continuing as it was supposed to. Diane had told him to stop working Sundays. She'd told him to make sure Leah knew who she was. She'd called hard things very good stories because she'd understood in a way that Victor was only now beginning to understand, that the painful and the meaningful were not opposites. They were made of the same material. The difference was only in what you chose to build with it. He proposed on a Saturday in April. Not with a plan, or not the kind of elaborate orchestrated plan he might have executed in a different version of himself, where everything was staged and controlled and designed to produce a specific outcome. What he had was a moment that arrived unexpectedly, the way the moments that actually matter tend to, and he recognized it and chose to meet it. They were at the park, the three of them, the no-phones park, and Leah was on the swings, which Clara was pushing at the specific height Leah demanded, and Victor was being directed to maintain from the bench where he'd been instructed to sit and watch like an audience. The afternoon was clear, late April light, the kind of Saturday that feels like the world is making an argument on its own behalf. Clara walked back from the swings and sat next to him on the bench, slightly out of breath, and they sat there watching Leah pump her legs with fierce concentration, trying to do it herself. "She's almost got it," Clara said. "2 more weeks," he said. "I think this weekend. You want to bet on it?" "I never bet on children," she said. "It's disrespectful to the data." She leaned back against the bench. The sun was on her face. "This is a good day." "Yeah," he said. He looked at her profile in the afternoon light and felt something move through him with the clarity of a thing that has stopped being a question and become a fact. "Clara. I need to tell you something." She turned her head and looked at him. She read his face in that way she had, and he watched her expression shift from relaxed to present, fully attending. "When Diane died," he said, I think I decided somewhere in the part of you that makes decisions without asking permission that the part of life that was about being known by someone was finished. That it had happened once, and it was over, and the rest was maintenance. Taking care of Leah. Running the company. Getting from one side of each year to the other. He paused. "I didn't decide it consciously. I just built my days around it being true." Clara didn't say anything. She was completely still. "And then I took a wrong turn on a bad morning," he said, "and walked through the wrong door, and you were standing there with paint on your hands, and none of it was planned." He looked at her. "And somehow everything I'd convinced myself was finished turned out to just be waiting. For a different door." The swings creaked. Leah made a triumphant sound. She'd gotten the rhythm, finally, legs pumping in the correct sequence, keeping herself in the air. "I told you I don't do casual," Clara said. Her voice was steady, but something moved in it. "I know," he said. "So I want to ask you something serious." She looked at him for a long moment. The kind of look that reads all the way to the end. "Victor, I don't have a ring," he said. I know that's... I don't care about the ring." "I know you don't. That's one of the approximately 10,000 things I..." He stopped, started again, doing it the right way this time without the scaffolding of prepared remarks. "I want to build a life with you. With you and Leah, all three of us, the way it's been building, whether we named it or not. I want Sunday mornings that nobody works through. I want to keep watching you be with her. I want someone across the table who tells me true things, even when I've already made up my mind." He held her gaze. "I know the timing is what it is. I know we've been careful about all of it, and careful is right. But Clara, I know what I know. And I think you do too." Leah soared on the swings, laughing out loud now, fully aloft, pumping her legs in perfect rhythm against the blue April sky. Clara looked at him. Her eyes were bright. She pressed her lips together for a moment in that way she had when she was deciding how to answer something honestly. "You framed a finger painting in October," she said. "I know." "I knew then." "I know," he said. "I knew too." She exhaled, not nervousness releasing, but something larger, something that had been held carefully for a long time by a person who knew how to hold things and was ready now to set it down. "Yes," she said. Simply. No performance, no construction. Just the word direct and whole. From the swings, Leah shouted, "I did it. Daddy Clara, I did it myself." Completely unaware that anything else had just happened, or possibly because she was Leah and she saw things completely aware. Victor raised his hand. "We see you, Bug." "I told you this weekend," Clara called back, and her voice broke on the laugh that came with it. Leah pumped higher, triumphant against the sky. They were married in September. Small ceremony. 60 people, an outdoor venue, a warm evening that had no right to be as perfect as it was given the general reliability of September weather. Marcus was his best man. Tom and his wife sat in the front row on the bride's side with the comfortable ownership of people who felt personally invested in the outcome. Dr. Park cried, which she would deny to anyone who asked. Leah was the flower girl. She had very specific ideas about this role and had been preparing for several weeks with the focus of a small professional. On the day she walked down the aisle in a purple dress, she'd chosen herself purple because it was hers, she'd explained with the same certainty she'd had about the butterfly painting, and she spread the petals with enormous deliberate care, one at a time, which was not the pacing anyone had rehearsed, but which absolutely nobody corrected. Because watching Leah Hayes place rose petals on the ground with the gravity of someone performing a significant task turned out to be the thing most people remembered about the whole evening. When she reached the front, she stood next to Victor and took his hand, and then reached over and took Clara's hand too, and they stood there, the three of them in a line, while the officiant began, and Victor looked out at the 60 faces, looking back at them, and thought about wrong turns and wrong doors, and the mathematics of how a life actually builds itself, which has very little to do with the plans you make and almost everything to do with what you choose when the plans fall apart. He thought about Diane. He thought about the phone call from the doctor's office. This is going to be a very good story. He thought about the promise he'd made and the Sunday mornings and the blue and purple painting still in its frame on the wall at home, which they'd discussed moving when they redecorated, and then decided to leave exactly where it was. He thought about a parking lot at 8:24 a.m. on a Tuesday in September, and a woman with paint on her hands, standing in a doorway, and a little girl who said the sun in her family portrait needed to look happy enough. He looked at Clara. She was looking at him, not at the officiant, not at the guests, at him with the same eyes that had been reading him to the end of the sentence since the first morning. The eyes that didn't require him to perform anything, that had always just wanted the true version. He squeezed Leah's hand. She squeezed back immediately and pressed against his side. He said what he meant. She said what she meant. It was not complicated. The things that actually last never are. The following year moved with the quality of something being built correctly, not without difficulty, not without the ordinary frictions of three people learning to be a family, but with the specific steadiness of people who had chosen each other with their eyes open and intended to keep choosing. Victor still worked hard. That didn't change and wasn't supposed to change. Hayes. Technologies grew through the first quarter into the second. The North American platform expanded. Marcus got the promotion that had been overdue since the year before, and the Frankfurt situation resolved itself exactly as Victor had told Miriam Cho it would, which he did not mention to anyone except Marcus, and only once. The work mattered. It had always mattered. The difference was that it had found its correct proportion in a life that now had other things in it with equal claim. He stopped working Sundays. Completely. He'd been working on that promise for 2 years, and he finally got there, and when the first full Sunday passed without a single email sent or received, it felt less like an absence and more like a door finally level in its frame. Leah turned 4 in the spring and threw a birthday party at Sunshine that Dr. Park technically didn't sanction and also definitely attended. She could swing on her own with the confidence of someone who'd been doing it for years. She could write her name in the large, unsteady letters of a child who knew exactly what each one meant. She asked questions constantly about caterpillars and clouds and why the sky was blue and whether Mr. Buttons dreamed, and the questions were asked with the security of a child who had learned that the people around her would take the questions seriously, which was the most important thing she had learned in 4 years of living. One evening in late spring, Victor was putting Leah to bed. The window was open, mild air, the neighborhood settling into quiet. They had done the book Her Current Choice, a story about a bear who was trying to find his way home, and he had turned off the light and was sitting on the edge of the bed in the dark the way he did, because she slept better when someone sat there for a few minutes, and because he'd stopped pretending he didn't also need those few minutes. "Daddy," Leah said. "Yeah, Bug. I'm glad you got lost that day." He was quiet for a moment. "What day?" "The wrong school day," she said. "When you took me to Sunshine by accident." He looked at her in the dark. She was on her back, Mr. Buttons under her arm, looking at the ceiling. "Yeah," he said. "Me too." "If you didn't get lost, we wouldn't have Clara," she said. This was delivered in the tone of someone stating something so obvious it barely needed saying. "And Clara is the best thing." He thought about what to say to that. He thought about all the ways he could frame it. The luck of it, the timing, the strange chain of a bad morning and a wrong exit, and a parking lot, and a woman with paint on her hands. He thought about all the things it would be reasonable to say to a 4-year-old about how the world works, and how life finds its way. "Yeah," he said. "She is." Leah nodded satisfied, and closed her eyes. He sat there a while longer in the quiet. Through the half-open door, he could see the hallway light and hear Clara somewhere in the house, the small domestic sound of her moving through a space that was now fully hers, that held all 3 of them the way a house should, with room for grief and work and laughter and imperfect grilled cheese and small hands placing rose petals one at a time, and butterflies painted in blue and purple by a child who picked the right colors, because she'd always known exactly what mattered. Victor Hayes had built a company from nothing. He had survived things that should have ended him. He had made 100 decisions in the dark with incomplete information, had been wrong a significant portion of the time, and had gotten back up, had collected losses and turned them into something, and called it a life. And on a bad Tuesday morning in September, with 17 notifications on his phone, and 40 minutes until the most important meeting of his career, he had taken a wrong turn. The kind of mistake any distracted, grieving, imperfect father could make, and walked through the wrong door. And everything that mattered was on the other side of it. That was the whole story. That was all of it. Some doors look wrong right up until you walk through them, and then you look back and you realize they were the only door all along.